A man macrodosed online bought mushrooms. This is what happened to his brain. M.A. is a 44-year-old man presenting to the emergency room unconscious. His roommate Brendon tells the admitting physician that M.A. was shivering on a bed before he stopped breathing for an unknown amount of time. M.A. was participating in his personal practice of holistic medicine, where he would consider his mind, body, spirit, and emotions to achieve optimal health and wellness. One evening, Brendon got a delivery of some special mushrooms that he bought online. It was time to engage the mind and spirit aspects of health. Immediately after eating one mushroom cap each, M.A. and Brendon felt good. They could feel their arms and legs become like sludge as their toes grew like roots into the ground. Nothing that's natural can ever be bad for you, they thought. M.A. had tried these mushrooms before, but the effect was unique. These weren't hallucinogenic in the way that magic mushrooms are. It's not psilocybin. The mushroom itself is just a reproductive organ of a deeper, more prevalent fungal being that embeds itself into the earth and helps digest, process, and recycle important ecosystem elements. M.A. believed that being closer to these organs and putting them into his body was the only true way to heal, just like Mother Earth intended. M.A. had heard of microdosing, but he had his own interpretation of what a dose should be. He told himself it either works or it doesn't. Dose absolutely matters, and the only way to true health is to zoom out and see the bigger picture. Only a macrodose was good enough for him. Immediately after eating 6 more mushroom caps, M.A. laid down on his bed. He closed his eyes and drifted off. Brendon would sometimes check in on him, but it was here where weird things started to happen. M.A. started twitching into strange positions. Brendon, having eaten only 1 mushroom cap, was unsure if he was imagining things, but he checked to make sure that M.A. was still breathing. Everything was fine, but as the time passed, his body would twist and distort, and then he started shivering. When Brendon called out his name, there was no response. M.A. sprung up from the bed to go empty his stomach into the toilet. Huddled over and shivering like he was out in the cold, Brendon wrapped M.A. in a blanket, hoping that he could warm him up. But 9 hours pass. M.A. silently stops breathing. Brendon, totally clear-minded now, was sitting on his phone, entirely unaware that something terrible was happening. M.A. started convulsing. In the chaos, Brendon runs up. 911 is called. In the ambulance, M.A.'s heart stops beating. CPR is given as he's brought to the emergency room, where we are now. When the heart stops, oxygenated blood doesn't reach the brain. The chest compressions given during CPR, or cardiopulmonary resuscitation, are to try to circulate blood during this time. Typically, the brain receives 15 to 20% of the heart's output. The brain is the first place that blood goes to after it exits the heart. CPR only generates 25% of normal blood flow, but it's the best that we can get until the return of spontaneous circulation, and in the seconds to minutes that the brain doesn't get adequate oxygenated blood, it quickly starts to die. Almost half of patients who regain their pulse after cardiac arrest will experience at least another arrest, meaning that there's a high chance that the heart can stop again. And even worse, when someone's resuscitated, they're likely to experience heart dysfunction. One of these is hypotension. Hypo meaning low, and tension referring to pressure, in this case, blood pressure. When the heart isn't strongly pushing blood enough, the organs start to starve of oxygen and they start to shut down. But it seems like this happened because he stopped breathing. And as his body starved of oxygen, the most energy-intensive and metabolically active tissue of the heart started building up acid and waste until very quickly it started shaking in place, not actually coming to a full contraction to pump blood out before finally it could no longer beat. Paramedics told the medical team that this is what happened, and M.A. had a tube put down his throat so that a machine could breathe for him. This will solve his hypoxemia, hypo meaning low, ox referring to oxygen, and emia meaning presence in blood. Low oxygen, presence in blood. Medicines were given to raise his blood pressure, all of this meaning that his breathing and his heart are okay now, but it looks like something is still wrong with his brain because M.A. was still unconscious and unresponsive. A noxious smell usually causes one to pull away when presented, but when doctors present it to M.A., there was no response. Pricking his hand with a pin should cause him to draw his hand away, but also there was no response, and his limbs were limp. Typically, when light is shined into someone's eyes, the pupils constrict so as to limit the amount of light in. This is a reflex, and it means that the patient's brainstem is still intact, but when doctors shine a light into M.A.'s eyes, his pupils don't react. But why did he stop breathing in the first place? When MA had presented to the emergency room, Brendon told the admitting physician about the mushrooms that they ate. He even brought the bag with him to show them. On the package was the name Amanita muscaria, and this gives doctors some clues as to what's happening. Amanita refers to a well-documented family of mushrooms. They aren't magic mushrooms, which are Psilocybe cubensis. However, muscaria is important to know because some amanitas, like Amanita phalloides, known as the death cap mushroom, are fatally toxic, causing irreversible liver damage that would need a transplant within days after ingestion. Sometimes amanitas get mistaken in identification. Ones that are toxic are mistaken for ones that aren't, and then accidentally eaten. A family in California, 2016, had eaten Amanita phalloides that they had picked in the forest, and 2 needed emergent liver transplant, with the youngest daughter suffering from permanent brain damage as a result of her liver being shut down for so many days. But Amanita muscaria isn't hepatotoxic, hepato referring to the liver. Instead, it has neuroactive chemicals. It's in the name. Muscaria. One part of the nervous system that handles rest and digest responses is the muscarinic acetylcholine receptor. That nerve structure is named after muscarine, which was extracted from this mushroom in the 1800s. So, if MA laid down and kind of slept after macrodosing his Amanita caps and then started hurling his guts out later, this sounds like rest and digest, but muscarine alone isn't adequate to explain what happened because more recently, we found that Amanita muscaria has 2 more psychoactive chemicals, ibotenic acid and muscimol. Both act directly on the brain and tells us what happened to MA. The brain has a pathway to excitation. It's done by a chemical called glutamate. It's how monosodium glutamate, or MSG, in food works, by sending a little excite signal to the brain from the taste buds. But if there's excitation, then it means that there's a pathway to depression, and that's done by GABA. Normally these are in balance with one another, but when someone eats a massive amount of Amanita muscaria, that balance might get thrown off, and this tells us more about MA. Ibotenic acid stimulates glutamate receptors. This causes that initial undesired excitatory reaction of confusion and agitation when someone eats a raw Amanita muscaria. In some reports, someone who had eaten Amanita pantherina, a mushroom that usually contains a lot of ibotenic acid, was so mind-altered that he repeatedly dropped his camera until it broke. But Amanita muscaria also has muscimol, which acts on the GABA pathway in the brain, causing sleep and coma, the response that this mushroom is known for. Sometimes you'll hear it be called the soma mushroom. The thing is, ibotenic acid is broken down in the body into muscimol, meaning that the overall effect when a therapeutic amount is consumed usually ends up as that sleepy dreamlike state that Amanita muscaria is known for. All of this from the chemical stimulation of the brain's inhibitory centers. But what's something that could happen when you have too much rest and digest response? Well, GABA works on the parts of the brainstem that regulate breathing. When they're overactivated, they can depress breathing. Sometimes people ingest more than just mushrooms, but a blood test didn't find any other substances that could do any of this floating around inside MA. The at least 6 caps that MA macrodosed accidentally unleashed a massive amount of muscimol that over several hours impacted his breathing to the point where it stopped. And then his heart stopped beating, but his roommate didn't know for several seconds to minutes. This starved his brain of oxygen for long enough to cause permanent damage. The problem with this is when the heart restarts and blood starts flowing around again, this actually damages the brain again. Let's look at the damage caused when his heart stopped. Brain cells don't store energy. Oxygen is needed to produce energy, and you get that from blood circulation, and the brain needs a lot of energy to function. One function that consumes that energy is maintaining the balance of sodium and potassium inside brain cells. This helps maintain the right amount of fluid in the brain. But when enough energy isn't around anymore, the balance is no longer kept, and the brain starts to swell with water. This causes the first round of permanent damage. And when the heart starts beating again, glutamate excites the brain like it normally does, but the brain cells have changed. While they were starving of oxygen, the mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, had received a huge influx of calcium. Now that oxygen is back, this calcium has the mitochondria use that oxygen to make chemicals that damage the cell. When the brain cells can no longer take the stress, the immune system rushes in to do even more damage. All of this meaning that because MA didn't regain consciousness when paramedics brought him back, and his brain is missing important reflexes. He doesn't respond to noxious stimuli. His pupils no longer react to light. It might be too late for him. In the intensive care unit, bags of ice are placed on MA to try to cool his body. Lowering core body temperature helps maintain the integrity of the blood-brain barrier. It helps limit inflammation and protect against changes that happen in the body during that initial ischemic injury that happened at the time of the cardiac arrest. It's been demonstrated to reduce the extent of brain injury in this setting as the medical team monitors him over the next few days. Amanita muscaria products have become more accessible throughout the United States in the early 2020s. They've become so common in some areas that you can buy them at gas stations. But in that case, they might not actually be Amanita muscaria products. In 2024, there were 180 people who ate microdose edibles and chocolates. 73 ended up hospitalized, and 3 people are suspected to have died associated with the ingestion of these products. In an announcement, the company said that they were recalling the products because of muscimol. So, are these Amanita edibles? Because that's what it sounds like. In the official investigation, FDA-associated laboratories found a wide array of chemicals way beyond what would be found in a muscaria mushroom. Things such as 4-ACO-DMT, also known as 4-acetoxy-NN-dimethyltryptamine. Amanitas are not psilocybe mushrooms. They don't have those chemicals inside, but the lab found the psychoactive chemical psilocin in some of these edible products. A prescription medicine named pregabalin, known as the brand name Lyrica, which isn't found in any actual mushroom, was also found in some of these products. We don't know why these are in here or how they got in there, but the FDA knows about it now. Usually, with packaged edible products that come in a box, someone else is going to reply that, that's why I grow my own mushrooms. But at least for this one, you can't. There's been people who have tried. Do you remember that mushrooms are just the reproductive structures for a larger organism? Well, it seems like getting Amanita muscaria to fruit is hard to do indoors. Psilocybe cubensis can be grown, but this one's different. And if it weren't for the fact that these edibles didn't have appreciable amounts of ibotenic acid or muscimol in them, one could make the case that being forced to pick these mushrooms from the ground and incorporate them into the edible would create some variation. In a product genuine of its claims, this could likely be the case. Some individual mushrooms will have different amounts of these chemicals. It could even change depending on what season it is, or how open the mushroom is at the time. But these implicated edibles probably can't even claim this because the psychoactive compounds contained within have been demonstrated by a lab to not even be from this mushroom itself. It's like a cruel joke that people want to avoid big pharma by consuming this kind of product, and then they end up getting duped by big pharma ingredients. So let me be clear, with Amanita muscaria, be careful. With some edible that never tells you what's inside and uses the buzzwords to draw you in, be very careful. At the end of the day, the saying still holds. If you don't need to put it in your body, don't put it in your body. And also, if you believe it to be your medicine, treat it like medicine. MA and Brendon had health beliefs rooted in good intentions, but a sequence of events rooted in excess ended in tragedy. After 9 days in the intensive care unit, MA didn't regain consciousness. His neurologic status did not improve at all, and his life support was discontinued. At autopsy, they found extensive brain damage consistent with post-cardiac arrest brain injury, and given that they were monitoring him closely in the hospital and that he presented to the emergency room somewhere between 9 and 11 hours after ingestion, they ruled his death as accidental. The toxicology screen didn't detect any substances of misuse that would cause one to stop breathing like this in this amount of time, and he ate the dried Amanita muscaria mushroom by itself, not some derivative product that may have had a grab bag of random psychoactive compounds in it. This incident was an accident. This case was published in literature in the realm of recorded Amanita muscaria poisonings in the United States. It's an incredibly, incredibly rare outcome. But please remember, there's other Amanitas that are easily fatally toxic in different ways because they're different species in the same genus. We can make mushroom jokes and memes, but when it comes down to the fungus getting in your body, at a minimum, you have to respect what it can and will do, because if you don't, you're going to find out. Thanks so much for watching. Take care of yourself and be well.